Welcome everybody who's joining us. We're glad that you're taking time to be part of this Pull Up a Chair. And I want to just reiterate why we do these, what we call Pull Up a Chair so far Zoom sessions. I think we're getting very close to being able to do this in person or webinar, I should say. But I think we're getting close to being able to do it in person, and maybe we can do that and put it on Zoom. But the reason we do these Pull Up a Chairs is very much what Paul was alluding to if you've been on here for a bit. It's this idea of stepping toward the difficult topics of our time, the issues that are important in our country, that are dividing people, that are causing conflict and tension. And especially as Christ followers, we want to be the hands and the feet and the eyes and the ears of Jesus in the midst of these tough situations, and do the best we can to kind of model, and both through our actions, maybe mostly through our actions, and then occasionally, if needed, our words, try to point people to the way of Jesus and to the hope of his goodness and the hope of his shalom and grace, which obviously in the world we live in, both are desperately needed. And so the reason we do these pull up a chairs is we have deep convictions about who we are to be as Christians with one another, who we are to be as Christians with the world, and how we are to be, especially where there is pain, where there is conflict, where there is tension, where there is differences, remembering and recognizing that as Christian people, we are invited and we are called to do it differently than people who are not Christians do it, and to step into it in a way that Jesus would. And there's a good verse for us to remember. If you have some time, or if you're looking for something to read that would be helpful as it relates to why does Oak Hills mess around with these things and step in these things, Ephesians chapter 2 is one chapter, particularly starting in verse 11 to the end of the chapter, that is a really good verse, really good passage on reconciliation. It's where Paul is talking about, initially there were the Jews, and the Jewish people were the people of God, and Paul's mission and ministry was to preach the gospel to the Gentiles, that this dividing wall of hostility, as he refers to it, would collapse, and that these two groups would become one group in Christ. And his language in verse 19, consequently, you are no longer speaking here to the Gentiles, those who are on the outside. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people, and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. Such a beautiful picture and reminder to us that we are a people, we are a community of those who are different, that have been brought together in unity in Christ and under Christ. And we want to continue to work on that and let the Spirit of God cultivate that in us. So tonight, our specific topic has to do with racism toward Asian Americans, something I'm sure you've heard about in the news of late. You may not have heard about a recent incident at Vista del Lago High School. I became aware of this just in the last day or so, but an email went out from the principal of Vista del Lago to the parents and students regarding a recent racial harassment and racial slur that took place between some students and an Asian student. And the principal was speaking directly to the culture of Vista del Lago, what they want to foster, what they don't. It was a very assertive word on not tolerating this kind of violence. And as, again, you know, this is on the rise rapidly in our country. Racism against Asian Americans. I found one statistic suggesting there's been a 150% increase in this in the first quarter of 2021, which is astounding. When you think about it, there are many particular examples we could go over. A couple that you might have heard of. There was an 84-year-old Thai immigrant in San Francisco who died after being shoved to the ground while he was out on his morning walk. And in Brooklyn, New York, an 89-year-old Chinese woman was slapped in the face and then set on fire by two people who were perpetuating a racial attack on her. So there's just been this rise in anti-Asian American, this kind of emphasis and push and racism against Asian Americans. So I want to start this off, and I'm going to ask each person to introduce themselves. So Paul, if you would begin, tell a little bit about who you are, maybe a little bit of your family and your background, and then talk about what it's been like for you in the aftermath of these attacks and of this racism against Asian Americans, thoughts, feelings, experiences that you've been going through.
Okay, so in the context of what we're doing, this is how I'm going to tell you about me. So I'm a first-generation immigrant from Hong Kong. I came to California in 1976 and spent some time in the Bay Area, and then went to Stockton, California to go to college there. After graduation, spent some time in Chico, and then went back to the Bay Area. And then in 2010, Melina and I moved to the Folsom, El Dorado Hills area. And I am more Californian than any geographical place in the world. You know, I spend most of my time, I spent more than 40 years of my life in California. And so I see California, I see this is my home. This is where I belong. And so thank you for asking how I'm doing with all these anti-Asian xenophobia going on. I would say I'm doing better. I mean, ask me a month ago, I would have told you that I was a lot more apprehensive. I was watching the nation very closely. I was watching my neighborhood closely to see how this is going to impact me. If you ask the Asian American community, what's the prominent emotion in this mess? A lot of people would tell you that it's going to be fear and anger, and I can tell you I'm fearful, but it's not mean, it doesn't mean that my heart is pounding kind of fear, right? It's not like that, but I am anxious of what's happening. I am very conscious of myself when I'm out in the public. When I go take my morning walks, when I run into my neighbors, I'll be thinking like, so what does he think of me? What does she think of me? When I say good morning, I'm more attentive to see how are they going to reply, right? Is it going to be like, hi, good morning, like friendly, or like, yeah, morning, like, get out of my way. When I go to the local grocery store, when I go to O'Reilly's, I find that I am intentionally more engaging with people. And when I kind of self-examine, like, why am I doing that? I guess psychologically, I'm trying to prove a point that, hey, I'm good, I'm normal, I'm just like you. Maybe I'm trying to get them to get to know me. If they know me in a more personal level, they wouldn't think of me as a bad person.
So Paul, let me ask you, just to follow on that.
Yeah.
Would you say that way of thinking is uncommon for you? That's a more recent development?
Yeah, that's a recent development. We talk about racism, and we know that stuff like that happens. Well, I mean, not the intensity, but racism exists for a long time. As an Asian American, first generation immigrant, I experienced different stuff. The situation may not be a hostile, but basically a situation that make me realize that I'm a foreigner. That kind of feeling. But in the recent years, the last mainly from last year on, it basically intensified. And give you an example, like about a month ago, Manuel and I were having coffee out in the Pete's, close to where I live. And we talked about this stuff. And I told him that, I was very conscious of the fact that we're two Asian men, having coffee out in the public. So I was kind of thinking, like, in the back of my mind, so are we going to attract any attention? Anybody? I don't think we're going to come and attack us. Manuel was pretty buff, I think. So I think I was safe. But is somebody going to, come and say something offensive? I don't know. And I can tell you that this is, I don't think that I'm oversensitive, because let me tell you a story that I don't think I told you before. So I called up some friends, right? And he lives in Elk Grove. That's not that far away from us. And I said, hey, so how you doing? You know, with all these stuff going on, how are you doing emotionally? How is your family? How, whatever, you know? And he told me a story of a couple that he knows, and they also live in Elk Grove, right? So this couple were just taking a walk, right, by the lake, and a car pulled over. And the guy rolled down the window, and there's several guys in there too. They rolled down the window. Apparently, they asked in a very hostile way, "Are you Chinese?" And they are, right? But they were so afraid. They said, "No, we're not. We're not." And the guy rolled up the window and drove away. So thank God that nothing like that happened to me personally. But you know, stuff like that are actually happening outside. It's really happening in real time.
Thank you. Helen, maybe you can introduce yourself, and same question, what's it been like for you in the aftermath of the racism and the attacks?
My name is Helen Lewis. I'm an American, Asian American. Roughly, I've lived my life, half of my life in the Philippines. And the other half, or when I lived in the Philippines, I lived with my own people and in my own homeland. And half of that is lived here in the States, where I live as a foreigner. I'm married to a white Caucasian. Anyway.
That was good.
So I always live in a place where I'm a foreigner, even in my house. But in my house, my husband is also a foreigner. So we live a house where we can see how the world should be. Like you can be with two different people, two different languages, and still be like, sometimes, to be honest, I forget sometimes how short I am or how dark my skin is until I see our picture walking together on a side of a department store on the mirror. And oh my gosh, I'm so short, or I'm so dark, or you're so white, and things like that. Anyway, that's me. When I heard about this recent tragic incidents against Asian Americans here in the States, it wasn't like Paul's reaction. My reaction was like, I was sad, but to me, it's normal. To me, it's a normal thing. Racism is practiced or seen every day in many different forms. It might not be killing, but sometimes to the subject of racism, it might be equivalent to being shot and killing them on the inside, depending on where they stand at the moment. So that's how I feel. It's like it's a normal problem in the world, and it's been a problem a long time ago. I can tell you stories of that, but that's how I felt.
Okay. All right. So, we've done a few of these pull up a chairs, and a couple of them were focused on racism. So this question is going to sound perhaps annoying or uninformed or ignorant, and it's on purpose just to try to bring forth a question I know sometimes people have. And it goes something like this. Well, I hear all this stuff you guys are saying, but how specifically have you experienced racism? I mean, I know it's happening in other places and with other people, but how specifically have you experienced it? It's on, my mind, that's on one level a troublesome question, because Sometimes it feels like people are trying to minimize the whole issue. And on the other hand, it's perhaps equally troublesome because it's people wanting to say it's not that bad. So my question is, and Helen will stick with you on this, can you share, you just said this about stories, can you share specifics where you have experienced racism because of your ethnicity?
Yes, several incidents. I can point, I can name, I can, top of my head, I can enumerate 4 of them. First was, I was working at a retail nursery, and a customer would refuse to talk to me because for technical support, I was going to be helping her for some advice, but she would refuse. She said, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to someone else. That is annoying. That's difficult, but
you could tell in the discussion, this was I don't want to talk to someone of your kind. I want to talk to a different.
Yes, he wanted to talk to someone white.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yes, he was very specific. Yeah. And to me, that was hard, but I just consoled myself into thinking that, oh, they brought her back to me anyway, because I was supposed to be the one doing that kind of job. And the other thing was that a coworker of mine, or several coworkers, were talking about the fact that I have PhD in agriculture. And one of my coworkers said, she got her degree in her country.
Oh, really?
Yes. That was hard, but she was wrong. First of all, I got my degree in England. And I just didn't tell her.
So let me ask you about that. Just, Helen, was there anything in you when you found that out that wanted to clarify this with the woman?
Yes. I wanted to tell her where I got my degree, and it doesn't matter if I got it in the Philippines. I would not have been less proud if I did it like where I got my master's degree, which is in the Philippines. I would have been as proud as anywhere else because it didn't matter to me.
So when in the aftermath of that, I take it you didn't say anything to her?
I didn't say anything to her.
Did that affect your relationship with her going forward?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I made a lot of assumptions about her after this. Like she thought of me as a threat to her. And so she was trying to diminish the value of what I have so that she could rise up to where she wants to be.
We haven't, this is all just off script here, so I'm going to stay with this. If you were going to sit down with her to help her understand the impact of that on you, and let's say you were going to do that in a way where you really wanted to give her some guidance so that she would understand the weight of what she said to you and how racist it was, how would you have approached that? So you're going to have a redemptive conversation with her. You're going to try to mutually help her understand what's going on.
I would start with a Heineken.
I would say.
Probably 2, Helen.
I would tell her.
Film a service like that, yeah.
I would tell her that not to judge me based on her own opinion. Yeah. Because I know that she was stereotyping me. I'm a Filipino. I look like one. I speak like one. Therefore, I must have been educated in the Philippines. But the wrong part of the stereotype is that my education would have been lesser if it was from the Philippines, which annoyed me. But if I talk to her, maybe I would say, you don't know a lot of things. I don't know.
It's a tough question.
That is my opinion about people who are really who are putting me down, I think that they are very ill-informed.
Yeah.
I mean, they have very low exposure to the world. That's what I think.
Well, we got Helen going. All right, let's, Paul, I want to come back to you on this in terms of specifics. You shared the story with Manuel. You shared a bit about the different feelings you've had being out in the public in the aftermath of what's been going on and the racism. Any specific story or experience you've had that gets at this racism that you've experienced?
So the answer is yes. Although that I'm lucky that I never encountered something that is like really bad. I was a lot feistier when I was in my younger age. I'm a lot better now, I hope. And but still, yes, I have my share. And like Helen, I work retail, and this happened like a long time ago. This is before the pandemic. But there was this gentleman that came up and asked me for, he was looking for a product. I don't even remember what he was looking for. And I didn't know that we still carry that. I thought we were out of it. So I told him that, yeah, I think we are out of that. I'm not sure that we still carry that. I wasn't sure exactly, but anyway, so he went look for it and some more. And then 5 minutes later, he came back and he told me, and he found it. He had the product in his hand. So, oh, we found it. That's wonderful. And then before I go in, he's like, wait. And then he started lecturing me. He said, like, in this country, and I don't remember the rest of it, but statements like that incensed me, because the implication of that is, in this country, this is how we do things, and you're not from this country. And so that kind of implication just, basically made me feel low. And recently, the National Association of Evangelicalism posted a statement to grieve with the Asian American community because of the Atlanta shooting. And what caught my attention was the nuance. And they described some of the stuff. I just, I'm just telling you now on that story. So it's something called perpetual foreigner syndrome. And this is what it means, that in which people of Asian descent are constantly and consistently perceived as foreigners, even if generations of family members were born in the United States. And that's very true. I remember reading an article in New York Times. This is like a fourth generation Asian American journalist. And he was writing the story about he and his family just came out from church, going to lunch, and somebody just yelled out, like, go back to China. And, reading that makes me realize this is something that's not going to go away, not only for me, but also for my son, and also for the son of my son. So this is going to be something that lingers, and something that Asian American. Yeah, I'm sorry.
You know why we're perpetually foreigners here?
Yeah.
Because the way we look.
Yeah.
The Irish people can blend in after a while, but no matter what we do, we'll look foreigners. So we're always very easy to detect.
Yeah, that's right. I came to California in the 70s, right? So at that point, the cultural mindset was called the melting pot. So the melting pot mindset was actually realized with the white immigrants, because at that time remember there was a time that when Irish and Italians, they were Catholics, they were discriminated against. But for Asian American, we have a very different experience. And because we stand out, so there was an assumption that we are foreign. And so, yeah, that's my experience.
Thank you, Paul. So Jenny, you've been with us here and we're a half hour in, haven't heard from you yet. So let's go 2 parts on this. Just start by introducing yourself. Tell us a bit about who you are, your family, and then I'll ask you the question after that.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Jenny Jiang, and I'm not Asian. So I want to make sure that everyone's aware that I'm aware.
You're Caucasian.
I was really, sorry, Helen?
You're Caucasian.
Caucasian, yeah.
Okay. Yes. I thought you're from the Northern Village, but that it's good. It's good. It's all good.
Thank you for your grace. No, I had a lot of anxiousness about participating in this because I didn't feel like initially that that my voice would be as helpful. And anyway, I'm thankful to have a chance to be here, but I'm really, really grateful to hear from Paul and Helen. And my husband is from China. He's Jack. Came here in graduate school, and that's where we met. And then after he was here a couple years, we got married. And so he was a very recent immigrant when we were dating and married. And we've been married 20 years. And then we have 3 boys. And so they are also Chinese. So I would say we are, I like, Helen, I liked how you put that everybody's a foreigner in your house in some sense, or you and your husband both are. I think that is true. Or it's
And we created foreigners too.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
We created 3. We came up with 3 foreigners, different ethnicities.
Maybe getting a little further along in this than we want to, so, but that's just me.
Okay.
Okay, so anyway, sorry, Mike. Yeah, that was the introduction. I wanted to say one thing though, to the moment that we're in. Just Jack and I were talking about this, and he was saying he talks to his mom. All of Jack's family is in China still. He is the only one not in China, and he talks to his parents regularly, and his brother some, and cousins. Anyway, he talks to his family, and he said, my mom is telling me all the time, don't go out of the house. The news that they're hearing in China is that it's really dangerous for Chinese, and she's really scared for him and scared for the boys. But I guess so. She said, don't leave the house, don't stay at home, don't leave. Just another marker that there's a weight that people are carrying, right? And I know I've thought about it every time there's a new news report, like, okay, is everybody in my family safe? You know, even this new thing about the high school, I'm like, okay, are my kids safe? You know, and yeah. So anyway, that is just what I wanted to add to that. Yeah.
Good. So early in the pandemic, as we all know, the pandemic was labeled, among other things, the China virus. And if you read anything, you'll read that there's a connection between what we're talking about tonight and that label. So Jenny, I want to ask you to talk a bit about how that label and other pejorative labels around this pandemic have impacted you and your family as we've gone through this last year.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I'll start with the story. I was in the car with at that time, I think he was almost 15-year-old. He was a freshman in high school. He was still going to school. It was right before all the shutdown happened. So we were in the car, and on the radio was an interview with the mother of a Chinese doctor, the first one who had really sounded the alarm about the novel coronavirus. And so he had died, and they were interviewing his mother and getting her take on or just her grief, and just interviewing her about her son. And I was listening, with really attentive ears, and I don't really know what my son was thinking, but when it was over or after this interview with this woman, he said, whenever I hear Chinese spoken, it always gives me such a good feeling. I feel like such a calm, happy feeling when I hear it. And I knew that he was saying, I hear my grandma in that woman's voice, which is what I heard too. I was like, wow, she sounds a lot like my mother-in-law. And I guess my point is, like, for my husband and for my kids, their family is China. That's where Jack's mom and dad are. That's where he goes to eat the food that he likes to eat and sit and get harassed and check in with his brother and feel totally at home, right? That's where he checks on his cousin's kids, and that's where my kids feel, they're going to play badminton and hang out with their grandparents. And, I mean, that's just their home. That it's not a foreign thing for them, right? And to then label this as China virus is to turn it into a weapon, to turn the place that is sacred to them as their home, you know, and their family, to turn that into a kind of a weapon or a politicized way to protect some people and to create blame, to make this whole very stressful for the whole world time about blaming somebody, about blaming people, was really painful.
Wow. So thank you, Jenny, for sharing that. That's insightful, and it opens my eyes, at least in terms of understanding the stories and the relationships and the families that, you know, you kind of lose that in such a crass way of referring to this. So, you know, again, as I mentioned on this topic, for those of you that are tuned in, when you read these articles about what's been happening, the rise in racism against Asians, this 150% in the first quarter of 2021, you know, you can't separate it from the way in which our former president, labeled it the China virus. I mean, it's just, there's a connection there. There's no way to not link those two together. That being said, I know there are people who might hear this and say, well, I think you guys are being overly sensitive. You know, just saying where it's from, came from China, so we call it the China virus. So I'll ask, probably not all of you, but does anyone want to take a stab at how you might respond to that, to someone who felt that was overly sensitive?
I have a couple things to say.
Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I would say, well, that it had a name. It was given a very specific name. And so that to me is a first indicator. Here it is, you know, either called novel coronavirus or COVID-19. The choice to then pick a variation of that is not innocent at that point to me. The second,
maybe it's scientific. To choose a different name for it was more scientific reason, because it was labeled COVID-19.
Yeah,
I think.
So Helen, make sure I understand that. You're saying that it had a name, it was a scientific name. Let's leave it at that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it was in the beginning. I think there was no name for it because it happened very quickly. Yeah. So in order to isolate this one and to differentiate it from the rest of the viruses, they had to put a name. But before that, they had to call Wuhan virus or whatever it was. That was the simplest term that people would describe it because of its origin. I think I can give an example of that where people can use simple terms that might not mean to the people using it, but it could be different to the people. But once people who are uninformed might be using some terms, like for example, for me growing up in the Philippines, in this coastal town, I used to refer to Vietnamese as Viet Cong. I was a little girl, okay? And I grew up thinking that all Vietnamese are called Viet Congs. And until I learned better. So, but even now, I still sometimes revert to that term because I grew up thinking about that. But because I was ill-informed. But now I'm informed, I have the chance to use the right term, Vietnamese instead. I have had several Vietnamese friends already, and I think it's a good reason for me to train myself to think or to say the right term.
Yeah, got it.
And
okay.
So that links to when it got changed, this name was given a name, COVID-19. That's a chance to use it. And all of this happened so fast and so recently. I can't remember when it was called this name or that, except for that it
was in February. I was in Taiwan when the papers in Taiwan changed to COVID-19.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say to Mike, to the question, and I think you probably had an accurate quote, but you used the words "it's overly sensitive," and I mean, to me, like if we're hoping to have relationship with people, and they're telling us something hurts, like it's a general kind of rule, right, to not tell them they're being overly sensitive in general, right? Because then you're diminishing a person's hurt and telling them, oh, I mean, I feel like that's just a part. I know you're not actually saying that yourself, but that's a part of why it becomes so hard to talk about race when somebody brings their pain, and then you say you're being overly sensitive.
Right.
You've not heard me at all at that point, right? And you've negated and said, I won't hear you.
Yeah.
And so that just if somebody says something hurts, and I think like Helen had this example of the Viet Cong, if you realize it, you can say, this is what I was meaning at the time. I didn't realize, and I'm really sorry. I want to change that. I didn't grasp that would be hurtful.
Which
and now I do.
That's a wonderful way of capturing and describing what I know is true of me. I suspect it's true of the folks who are tuned in here. Is we're not trying to talk about this in a way that wants to, quote unquote, get mad at each other for not saying it the right way or whatever. But what you just said is perfect in terms of, let's pull up a chair and talk about why something like the China virus is offensive to those who may be Asian, and being able to dialogue on that with humility, listening first. I mean, that's kind of at the heart of what this forum is all about, is to encourage that as Christ followers who want to be reconcilers in this fracturing world. So, Paul, as you think about that, and I'm just, if you have a thought or two on that sensitivity issue.
Yeah. So when I say Forge of Empire, you guys know what I'm talking about?
What I didn't hear.
Forge of Empire. Forge of Empires is a game. It's an online game. I play Forge of Empire.
So, yeah,
so I have a guild, right? You have a guild, and I'm the founder of the guild. So I have to oversee a lot of people under me. And when they play this game, they start chatting, right? So what do they chat? I try to get them to just, hey, play the game. No, they have to talk about social issues, right? So somebody start talking about the pandemic, some start calling it China virus. And then some guild member got really pissed off because they may not be Asian themselves. They have Asian friends, Asian family. They may be like, married to an Asian or something, Asian cousin. And then someone's like, what? Hey, I'm not racist. Basically my point is this. It's very, it's a really messy thing to talk about. So things can get like really heated up. So people leaving, whatever like that. So I heard of people using, even professionals, doctors, using terms like China virus. And their argument is that, hey, I'm not racist. I'm just referring to the place of origin. And there is truth to that. At the same time, I think that people who continuously using terms like that are not paying attention to the gigantic shift of cultural mindset. So I don't think that everybody says, uses term like China virus or racist. I think some of them, a good percentage of them, are trying to be resistant to the conformity to some kind of political correctness. I think there's some of that going on. Right. But I also think that there's a major shift of cultural mindset that things are very different. Give you an example. 50 years ago, nobody in this country feel that their identity is being threatened. Nobody in this country feel that somebody is replacing them. And so at that time, we have something called Hong Kong flu. I'm from Hong Kong, right? Now, 50 years ago, I was a kid, and nobody would say, "Oh, this is racist." No, we wouldn't say that. We actually feel kind of a little bit giddy about this. Oh, hey, we are famous now. We have Hong Kong flu. In Hong Kong, we refer athletes with the Hong Kong foot, right? So we got Hong Kong flu, Hong Kong. Hey, we're gonna be famous. What else do we have? But nowadays, I think that we are in such an ethnocentric tribalism mindset that these kind of things actually fuel into that tribalism. It's separating people. So the use of vocabulary over time have actually changed its impact on stuff like this.
Yeah.
So in a way that I hear you when somebody say, yeah, I'm not a racist, I'm just referring to this place of origin. On the other hand, I would like to tell you this piece of information, extra piece of information. So if you are truly not a racist, and I'm happy you're not, consider this as what's happening. Now, how do you do this better?
Which I think we try to stay in our lane in these discussions, and our lane is we are talking about this from the vantage point of followers of Jesus, people who believe he is king, people who believe that he wants to bring shalom into this world, in us and through us. And so those kinds of things, back to Jenny's point about the sensitivities people have, or what you're talking about, Paul, we want to step into that and listen with humility, if for no other reason, because we are following Christ, wanting to be reconcilers, and we live in a different world than, as you're saying, 50 years ago. So that seems like an invitation from God to be in those spaces as Christ followers, wanting to bring reconciliation and healing in there versus perpetuating the division.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we think about this related to Oak Hills and spiritual formation, we talk about this all the time of who we are without is a reflection of who we are within. These things come from within. When we first started this Pull Up a Chair series, Sharon and I talked about racism as a sin that circumstances in the world have brought it forth, but it's not like it just created it. It's, as you said earlier, Helen, it's in people. And so my question is to you, Helen, is when you think of the spiritual formation, who we are kind of phenomena of who we are on the outside comes from the inside, how would you describe the deeper issues within an individual that drives racism?
I think it starts from the Garden of Eden. The men's desire to be better, men's desire to be superior above all else. In fact, Adam and Eve wanted to be better than God. That's why they committed the sin. Anyway, as now here outside the Garden of Eden, I think we feel each man, I'm speaking from my own experience, believe that he or she is better than the other person. And every other person should act like he is better.
Yeah.
Like they are better. I am better than everyone.
Right.
And if people don't act that way, there is a problem. But if people will act and believe that I am better, then there's shalom. But unfortunately, every person believes that way. So there is no shalom at all. So, and by nature, we are all racist because we want to be better. So we judge people on whatever parameter we want to use to put them down so that you are up.
So you're saying there's something within human beings that wants to be superior over other human beings.
Yes.
Hey, go ahead.
I'm a person, and I think that way, that I want to be superior than the other person, and then put all the people in one house who think like me. And so we want to think about the people on the other house as less superior than us.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the people in the other house also think the same way towards us.
Gotcha.
So that's
So that just festers within the human soul, and then when circumstances come, then out comes that sense of superiority. If I'm
that's
hearing
right. And
So-
whatever.
when you talked earlier, and I know you were only a young girl at the time, but I think when you were talking earlier about the Viet Cong, you're referring to the negative impression of Viet Cong out of the Vietnam War era. And somehow that got in you that anyone who looks like that must be Viet Cong. Am I interpreting this right? Is that right?
No, I didn't have any implication of a negativity on the term Viet Cong. That's what I was saying. It was pure ignorance on my part about what Viet Cong meant.
But okay, I see. But what it meant was, it's what you're saying. What it meant to you at that time, did it mean they were inferior?
No, but I could give you an example of people who we thought were lesser than us. So in the Philippines, there's so many dialects being spoken.
Mhm.
So in my little, should I say, village, we spoke one dialect, and the next village they spoke a different dialect, and so we always look down at them. So everything else is negative about them. Oh, they're lazy. Oh, they're lazy people.
Gotcha.
We stereotype them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So Paul, over to you. Same question, this idea of the deeper issues as we think of spiritual formation, your perspective on the deeper issues driving racism.
Yeah, so I think that's a wonderful question because when I look at the situation that we're witnessing, so is this racism? Yeah, I think it's racism, but I also think there's a bigger story underneath in the foundation, and racism is basically it just come out as an expression, and I think what our nation is going through has some kind of identity issue, and I think that's actually a bigger story. So let me use my son for example, right? So my son is a high school math teacher. So when he got his first student teaching job, so I asked him, so hey son, so what do you teach? Do you teach algebra or you teach geometry or what? And he said, no, Dad, I teach something called integrated math 2. And I was like, okay, I have no idea what he was talking about. So he was explaining to me that, oh no, Dad, it's all different now. See, they mix it all up. So okay. So the world is changing so fast that a parent may sometimes feel that he doesn't have much to teach his son with all the new technology, all the new lingo, the new new major, whatever. And if I don't know what's going on, I may feel that my authoritative figure is collapsing, is fading. Now, if we take that to the larger society, and now if you have been building your identity on your job, on the fact that you're usually the one who call the shots, that you're the one who would actually be pushing the mainstream culture agenda, whatever. And now that you are losing that, and if you don't understand what's happening, then you may feel that the world around you is collapsing, right? Now, when that happens, it's very easy for us to blame somebody or blame something, because there's something I can blame that's not me, right? It's being done to me. So in my case, it would be something like, well, they shouldn't have touched math. They should have left math alone. But on a larger scale, along come a populist and can tell you, well, let me tell you why this is happening to you. It's because of the Muslim, it's because of the Mexican, now it's because of Chinese or / Asian. So I think that is actually what's happening. Now, you know me, when I try to figure out something, I try to read it up. There's a evangelical historian, John Fia, at Messiah College, I believe. And he has a book called Believe Me, and he gave a very good diagnosis of what our nation has gone through in the past couple of years. And basically, he uses three premises to explain. Number one is fear. Number two is power. Number three is nostalgia. So he's saying that a community in our nation feels that they are being replaced, feel that they are losing their identity, feel that they're losing their social status. And that actually push into a collective fear. And that fear makes them want to grasp power to stop the wheel from spinning. And all this is happening in the backdrop of a nostalgia to an American past that may not even have existed in the first place. So I think that is actually what's happening. So if we want to have a spiritual perspective of what's going on, I think those are the deeper issues. An identity issue, it's something that is actually universal to everybody. It's not so much of an accusation of racism or not, because we can go back and forth at that level. That's only the surface. And we're not getting to the emotion, to the deeper level. But when we go down there and ask ourselves, so where do I build my identity? What is it based on? Those are actually very fundamental Christian questions. And if we can start from there, I think, yeah, we can probably, grab two bottles of Heineken and really pull up a chair and talk about this stuff.
So Jenny, over to you on this, because what Paul's talking about, I think, leads well to this idea of defensiveness. And so we think about sometimes Christians in this conversation, Christians in the racism discussion, Christians when it comes to some of the things Paul was talking about, even the fear, the power, and the nostalgia. But as it relates to this idea of Christians who get defensive in some of these conversations, any thoughts on where that defensiveness is coming from, why people get defensive? Do you have any perspective on that?
I think so. I think this ties in, at the beginning, Paul and Helen you guys were saying, and Helen, you said, what you were saying, we're always a foreigner, that perpetual foreigner experience. And Helen said, you know why? Because of our looks, right? And I felt such I don't know, like such a sadness when you said that.
Oh, really? Why?
I did. And, because it felt like we decided, and I felt like you kind of were saying, this is just the facts, that Americans look pale-skinned, white, Caucasian, right? They don't look they don't look like you, and they don't look Asian, right? And I guess that to ask people, I feel like so many people say, oh, well, that's true, you do look foreigner, instead of to examine ourselves and say, actually, there's no reasonable reason that Americans equals white, because there's been Asians in this country, there's been Africans in this country, there's been, of course, Native people before we were here. So the decision that you guys would look foreigner is
it's sad, right?
It's a reality.
Based on an assumption that we don't have to agree to, right? We don't have to anymore. But that, I just think that it comes back to, Paul, to what you said about that nostalgia. Like, I think there's a lot of people saying, oh yeah, you do look like foreigners because you are, instead of saying, actually, we were wrong about what Americans look like. We let media, we let politics tell us a lie about and we let ourselves tell ourselves a lie about what Americans look like. And we kind of like that lie because we like seeing ourselves in every TV show. We like seeing ourselves in every school book and hearing our history. So we were fine with that. And instead of saying, actually, that wasn't the whole truth at all, and it was hurting people while it was happening. And I felt like also, you know, Paul, you were saying during the time when people would say the Hong Kong virus and how that was kind of fun for you as a child, right? And I guess this time is so different because of that fear, and we already had fear of I mean, we're already in this America First thing before coronavirus happened, but when the COVID-19, I mean, it's been so devastating to the world, and in a way that I don't think the Hong Kong flu was, right? Everything stopped.
Yeah.
and I feel like that's a place where Christians could have spoken in to say, because I definitely heard from believers who were friends of mine variations of conspiracy theories about how it might have been because of the election, it might have been because of a Chinese lab, it might have been, and they weren't afraid to say that to me because they were grappling with how scary it was to suddenly see the world go out of control in a way that none of us had ever expected, right?
Yeah.
And I wish that we could speak into that we know God is here, but it is not about blaming people. That's what's happening with all these attacks. Is it's a place to vent out that blame that we feel, that terrible fear of we've lost control of, right? And
let me ask you about that, Jenny, just as you think of that, because this is right in the target of where I think people, you know, if we talk about the fear and the power, so you're in a conversation with somebody and you're having this dialogue and they say, well, Jenny, I'm just going to tell you, I am afraid. I feel like I have lost and I am scared. And, you know, I don't know what to do. And this is a Christian person. Where are you helping them? Where are you directing them? How are you helping someone process through? Yeah, I am afraid. And yes, I may be lashing out and assigning blame, but give me an alternative as a Christian. Give me a different path.
Mike, that's your job.
Well said.
I want
Well said.
I want to say something
Yeah.
about the looks. I want to
Yeah.
go back to the way Americans look. So when I became not Christian, when I became an American, which is not that long ago, my coworkers were celebrating. They put a flag hat on me and they played the national anthem throughout the day. And then the following day, someone told me, hey, that's not what an American would say. And you know what I said? Hey, I'm an American. Did you forget you were celebrating? I was an American yesterday. So
Yes.
I think the answer to these things is, like Paul was saying about identity. So where's your identity as an American, Paul? Are you Chinese or Hong Kong or American? You are American now. So liberate yourself from your old identity and then be the American that you can be.
Yeah, that was, thank you. That was actually something I have struggled for the longest time to realize what I am, because long time ago, right, when I first came to the United States, and I was thinking about this question of the identity of who I am, right? So something as simple as watching, let's say, the women's volleyball. If China is playing against the U.S. team, which team do I root for, right? Stuff like that. And but I also want to go back to what Jenny said earlier about feeling sad of what we mentioned on the perpetual foreigner syndrome. So this is what I want to say, Jenny. What Helen and I shared here, that's chapter 1 that chapter is real. It's there. And then there's also another chapter and subsequent chapters. And this is what I meant. So in the 70s and 80s, we have the melting pot mindset. But now we no longer have the melting pot mindset. We have the plurality, the diversity mindset. So now I am not only an American, I'm a Chinese American.
Yeah.
Okay, Chinese is my heritage. And so now I have a voice. The difference is this. With a melting pot mindset, American culture already existed. You know, wherever you're from, it could be from Italy, from Ireland, you could be from Germany, from Korea, from China, from Taiwan, Japan, doesn't matter. When you get here, you put down those other hats. You come into this melting pot and become one. You become this American culture. But that's not what plurality or diversity says, right? Plurality and diversity says, yeah, you bring in your own voice. You bring in your own voice, and each one of us is like playing a different instrument in an orchestra. We are playing something differently, but we are playing the same symphony. We are playing that national anthem. You know, the trumpet would sound differently, the violin would sound differently, but we are playing the same. We are creating this. So the second generation has their job to do, and the third and fourth generation have their adventure. So the story goes on. So I have written my chapter, and somebody else is going to be, you know, keep writing that book.
Right. I definitely wasn't feeling sad that you would be Chinese American or Filipino American. I think it was that you would say, America looks like this, and it's not me. I don't look. Rather than we say America is a very unique country that looks like a whole bunch of national ethnicities, and that's the challenge and the joy and the delight of America. But America is like a tiny blip compared to the kingdom of God, right? So it's not going to last, and to be barely recognized compared to how long and good God's kingdom and the varied beauty that will be there, and none of us will be foreigners there. But Mike, I wanted to go back to your question about because I don't want to give you everything, all the jobs, right? No, I do. I'll tell him, call Mike if you feel afraid. No. The fear question, I don't know. I would definitely feel like there's space to feel afraid and to feel, I felt fear at different times. I don't feel any shame about feeling afraid during this season, this last year. I felt afraid for my kids' education. I felt afraid for my kids' mental health. Sometimes I felt afraid for my parents or my grandpa's physical health, right? But so I feel like one thing I'll do is like legitimately hear that and carry that, and then say, it's so strange to have something like this happen. We know God is here. We have not seen this before, but we know God's here, and he's not surprised, and he can walk us through this. And when people say to me, well, it may be a Chinese lab, or maybe it's about the election, I say, it's hurting too many people. It's not just affecting us. That's suggesting that this is all about America. And that does not bear any relationship to reality. This is around the world, and it's hurting a lot of people. And we get to hurt with this world, but we are not going to blame people.
And I think what you're all pointing your finger at that is so essential is this notion of the kingdom of God is real, and we are invited to live in it. We are invited to bring our kingdom into God's kingdom and trust him with it. And you were talking, Paul, about these different identities in the melting pot and and the symphony. I mean, if that, we have to, for whoever's left on this thing, we have to, as followers of Jesus and as a local church, we have to continue to point each other to these greater realities, to point each other to the confidence we can have in Jesus, to point each other to my identity is as a son of the resurrected Jesus, beloved of his. And so we link together in that camaraderie and in that togetherness and in that oneness, because it's through that oneness and through that love we have for each other through Christ that witness happens and we testify to Jesus's resurrection. We didn't intend to get here, but I'm just going to say this, since Jenny said it's my job, I guess I'll take it, that there is we cannot, as people of faith, Christian people in a local church, we simply cannot let go of the communal call to be the people of God, to manifest the kingdom in our relationships, to listen to each other, to learn from each other, to trust that God is at work in our midst. And in the midst of this world of blaming and yelling and fighting and finding identities in all the wrong places, to be a community of people who trust Jesus, love each other, listen and learn from each other. And in the process of loving in this way, we manifest the kingdom. We manifest the reality of shalom. And I'm listening to you guys and I'm thinking of the fact that this is an old message. We say it a million times and it's coming through so loud and clear in what you're talking about. And coming from this perspective of God is with us, God is here, the kingdom is real, and our invitation and calling is to walk in it and to help one another walk in it. And in these places, as you said, Jenny, where there's fear, where there's a sense we're losing power, instead of grabbing it, we bring somebody into that. I'm feeling vulnerable here. I'm feeling like I'm losing something. It's not the admission of these things. It's what we do with them when we realize they're in us. And I just think that's, so I want to end by kind of asking you guys to, and maybe each of you could for just a brief time, reflect on, this is something Sharon and I have talked about many times. How do we keep this kind of conversation going? How do we keep the formation of our community of faith? How do we keep the formation of our community of faith around issues like racism, deep soul fractures that give rise to violence toward those who are not like us? How do we be a church and be a people that is continuing to process those things, talk about those things, and keep stretching ourselves to find Jesus's way in all that? Do any of you have a thought or two about how to keep this going, keep the conversation going, and continue to grow in these things?
You know, for me, it's going back to what we did in the cultural learning group, right? So the cultural learning group, we invited, I don't know how many, 15, 30 people. I think the first session was 30, and then we bring it down to about 15 people. It's a controlled setting. We tell our stories and we learn to listen to people. But in real life, I guess we are actually practicing CLG, practicing cultural learning group every time we approach somebody and to learn about that person. The more stories to learn about a person, the more you know about that person in a way that is like what I call missional, right? Or what Oki was talking about, missional. When I approach somebody, I'm bringing the entire kingdom of God with me into that person, and we circumvent this. We embrace the kingdom of God with this person and hear the story out. And And this is what we do. And this what we're doing here right now is actually a wonderful example of how we're doing this. And the fact that Oak Hills is doing this is probably a good opening line to situations like that. You want to have a conversation with somebody on this subject. Hey, our church did this. This is the link. Look at, what do you think? What are you? And then we can get into some of the subjects that we talked about. And the reason why I think this is good, because we would be using the right vocabulary to talk about this stuff, because we oftentimes would default in using the argument or whatever the politicians are doing, or the cable network are using, but we don't use enough church vocabularies, Christian vocabularies. But we talk about that and use those words, and we can get into a much more constructive conversation that gears to shalom, peace, love, joy, and patience and kindness.
That's good, Paul. Helen or Jenny, these would be also kind of our last words.
I don't know of any program like the CLG to recommend, but I think in living our lives as individuals, because we live every day, we go out every day, we are with people every day. It's a good idea, I think, which I tell myself to do that, is to just look at someone and decide that I'm only looking at the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to know from its individual person, and we should not stop from we should not start judging people based on the things that are seen, but attempt to go deeper, because there's a lot more to a person than what is obvious.
Good. Okay.
I mean, I agree so much with what has been said. And I guess one thought I have is to see that the times we're in feel like it's an invitation from God, a very strong invitation to enter into the questions and to enter into a deep dive about racism and our own complicity with that, and our own resistance and our own experiences. I mean, we are just living in a time that is crying out for us to attend to it. And I think there's a lot in us that wants to say, please, can we get past this and get back to how it was? I mean, a lot of white people, I think, would like to get it back to something that was a little bit more, when do we get to get through this and get to the other side that will be like before? And I that is what I hope will not happen. I hope that it will be, that we will, there are very many opportunities if you are interested in changing. God has a lot of ways to help, right? You're welcome to invite us over and meet Jack and our kids, invite us to outdoor something. But there's so many people, as Helen said, all around us to open our eyes to. There's so many books, obviously, to read. There's so much to read in the newspaper, to attend to, that it's mostly deciding that this matters to God, right? That each of these people in this world who, and the way that this world's structured has not been right.
Yeah.
And that we get to be a part of proclaiming that each person we see has a depth of sacredness that would blow our minds, right? And would make our world so much richer and so much more beautiful that we would not want anymore to have our old white world. It wouldn't be, besides having much worse food, it would just be much we would still be blown by the goodness and bigness and beauty of God, and we would never want to go back to thinking God only was trying to protect us and keep us safe.
Yeah.
That He had so much better for us.
Good.
So I would just say, don't shut yourself down. Keep opening up. Let yourself be uncomfortable and try another step and another step.
That's good. And to end this, just to tag on to all that, you're talking about the beauty, the sacredness of people. And, we're reminded of, it's a familiar statement, I suppose, but I think it bears remembering that the folks we're laying eyes on every day, the people that Helen mentioned were going out every day, will live forever. They are eternal creatures made in God's image. And we are either, to borrow a bit of C.S. Lewis, we're either enhancing their journey toward being restored in the image of God, or we're accelerating their journey toward continuing to be unlike him. And so I appreciate you guys sharing. I know that these things can be vulnerable, and in some ways, this is all being recorded, and it's a vulnerable thing to do. So I appreciate each of you and your sharing and the willingness to share about yourselves and tell stories and talk about what this means to you, and appreciate that deeply. Thank you for those of you that have joined us tonight. It's possible, maybe even likely, that something Helen said or Paul or Jenny has sparked something in you that you'd like to have further conversations about. This is what this is about, is to keep us talking to each other, sharpening each other, and growing in Christ's likeness on our journey together as a faith community. So if you'd like to sit down with one of these guys, or Zoom with them, or have a phone call with them, or whatever, just to talk more about these things, all three of them would be up for it and would be willing to. If you know their email, feel free to reach out to them. We talked about this ahead of time. They would love that. If you don't and you'd like to make contact with them, you can contact the church office. You could talk to Stephanie Valadez at the church, or Ashley Hansen, who coordinates a lot of this Pull Up a Chair, these forums. But just reach out to us and we will get you in contact with any one of these three folks. I would encourage that. That's a great next step. It's a great way to stretch and keep moving forward, keep the conversation going, so that we can continue to see Christ formed in us, both individually and as a community. So thank you again to those of you that were sharing, Paul and Helen and Jenny. Thank you to those of you who are joining us. And with that, we will wish you a good night. And
before you do,
sure.
I just want to add one thing, Mike. Going back to the very first question.
And ending. Go ahead.
Going back to the very first question, you asked me how I'm doing, and I told you that I am better. And I just want to share with you that the reason I'm better is because we were doing this. This is important to me. And because I know that my pastor care, my elders care, my church cares what's going on. So I know that I'm not facing this alone. So when I face a situation, I have my whole church with me. So thank you very much.
That's good, Paul. And indeed you do. So I'm glad you feel that from us.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Mike. Thank you. Good night.